What if I told you that you didn't have to fly to Eastern Europe to relive the USSR? Popular YouTubers like Bald and Bankrupt, they venture deep into the post-Soviet world by sifting through abandoned bunkers, traveling on 40-year-old trains, and chatting up babushkas to give us all a glimpse of a bygone era. But you don't have to go that far. The past isn't buried in history. It's right at your back door. Just haven't connected the dots. Taxed to death, buried in red tape, small businesses crushed, and handouts to the undeserving. That smell. Just feel it in the air. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a tour of Russia's inbred cousin. Welcome to the E.U.S.S.R.
When most people think of the Soviet Union, what do they usually picture? Long lines for bread, constant propaganda posters, maybe the eerie eye of the KGB. But that was just the tourist version. The real Soviet Union was not just lines for bread. It was a constant queue to access your basic liberties. Surveillance of speech, of money, of movement, even your identity. And if you think this is in the past, we don't have to think about it because it's history, look around you. The European Union is literally ticking all of those boxes one step at a time. Have you ever hesitated before saying something in public, even if it's true? That gut feeling where you pause and think, am I going to get in trouble for saying this? That's self-censorship. It used to be enforced by the KGB. Today, it's policed by social pressures, universities, and Silicon Valley. Now, people don't get sent to Siberia for expressing their opinions. Yet. Instead, they get demonetized, shadow banned, or fact-checked into oblivion for, say, sharing the opposite side of what happened 2 years ago. Now, as much as I openly talk about financial topics, there's a lot I do not say on purpose. I'm not alone in this. Many content creators censor themselves in order not to get deplatformed. Our channel, we've never taken a dime from YouTube, which does give us a little more freedom to speak. But other content creators, their livelihoods depend on them staying in line, say the wrong thing, and poof, suppressed by the algorithm, demonetized. It's a digital purge. And this isn't just a social media thing. Universities, once based on pushing the boundaries of knowledge, now openly punish anybody off the script. Students, they're not taught to think critically. They are taught to avoid landmines because they know that their professors, their woke liberal professors, are going to punish them for anything said outside of party lines. The Soviets, they had your neighbors, they had your co-workers inform on you. Today, it's AI moderation, automated surveillance, and fact checkers. And soon, your bank account and movement are going to be tied to your opinions. Just wait for the digital ID. Speaking of freedom of movement, even today in Russia, you are required to carry your ID on you at all times, or the police can take you to jail. But that's Russia, right? Not in the free West. Well, Belgium mandates you to carry your ID or face fines, even up to 24 hours in jail. And Greece mandates it as well. More and more EU countries are enforcing it. And if you still think that we're free to move, we got a taste of what real control looks like a couple of years ago when you had to get a permission slip just to go to the grocery store. And people were arrested for being too far away from their own homes. And if you think this was a one-time incident, think again. The European Union and other countries are going to implement lockdowns, whether it is for a climate scare or some new outbreak. Who's to tell? By the way, the next time that lockdowns hit with all this news coming out in the mainstream media, here's a practical tip so that you don't have to stay entrapped in your home. Set up a micro business in photography, even if you know nothing about the subject. Why is that? Because you'll need a permission slip to go out and enjoy the fresh air. And as a photographer, conveniently, your job is to take photos, whether it be of a building, of nature, landscapes, a bus stop, whatever the client requests. And when the police do stop you, as long as you have a camera in your hand, you can actually justify your presence. Control isn't just about where you go, it's also about what you eat. Everybody who lived under the Soviet Union remembers ration coupons. Sugar, flour, vodka, You were only allowed to buy your allotted share before the shelves were wiped clean. And governments, they fixed prices, so naturally shortages were inevitable. But this only happened in failed communist states. Surely this is all in the past. Well, look closer. Today, in France, stores have to block prices. Supermarkets, they must choose 100 products and block their prices, also known as prix bloqué. And this is usually for essentials and maybe some junk food. But for the other stuff, like eggs, meat, vegetables, dairy, prices have sometimes tripled over the past few years. That's its own form of rationing, just under a new name: artificial inflation. When the EU, they ban farmers from growing crops or raising livestock because of some green initiative, what do you think is going to happen? When they cull millions of chickens over the latest outbreak, what do you think is going to happen to the price of eggs? It creates artificial scarcity, and then they pretend it's organic. Meanwhile, the government-funded scientists will tell you how much eggs and meat you should consume. To all of my Eastern viewers, this might sound familiar. After all, this is something you could have read in an old Soviet newspaper. Now, since we're on the subject of food and green initiatives, let's talk about watermelons, specifically watermelon communism. Green on the outside and red as a Chinese military parade on the inside. Because make no mistake, the European Union green initiatives have nothing to do with the environment. They're all about moving money from small and medium businesses into large corporations that can actually play ball. Think about it. Large corporations such as Microsoft, Boeing, Coca-Cola, they have the deepest pockets in the world to always buy themselves out of any regulation. But the local store, the family-owned shop, the butcher, they have two choices. Either spend a fortune on green technology that barely works, or go out of business. They lose in both cases. And when all of the small businesses are run out of town, guess what's left? A handful of mega corporations that seemingly always align with government policy. Back in the Soviet Union, the state monopolies were not just about limiting competition. They were there to make sure that you depended on the state for everything. Because if you're not independent, then you are forced to obey the hand that feeds you. And in the European Union, specifically in France, Germany, Scandinavia, there's this massive indoctrination that somehow the taxes that you pay corresponds to what you are getting for free. And secondly, that it's a patriotic civic duty. Here in the south of France, public transportation is free. You can get to the French-Spanish border literally for €1 on a train. And the tax rates, they are nearing 50%. And let me break it to you, you're not getting back in return the same amount that was robbed from you. Ah, the good old microrayon, also known as micro-neighborhoods. They still exist in the East, full of commie block buildings, eerily similar to the ones I'm looking at right now. Essentially, everything is concentrated in one place, from schools, hospitals, cinemas, even supermarkets, so that you don't have to leave. And don't worry, the European Union is not far behind. France started building them back in the 70s, also known as cités, to house the migrant population. They're basically ghettos, but here's the kicker. They're about to rebrand them into 15-minute cities. And they'll pitch them as low-emission zones, conveniently with a bunch of surveillance cameras, similar to ULEZ in London. Sounds great, right? It's not. It's just another name for an open-air prison. In fact, on this topic of migration, this whole plan is tied to something much bigger: the erosion of European culture. And I'm talking about a real, deep-rooted cultural identity. Just like the USSR created the new Soviet man who had no identity other than a blind loyalty to the state, the EU is doing the same thing. Forget about who you are, screw your French, German, or Polish customs, forget about where you came from. And they want you to embrace a world with no individuality, no borders, just a global collective obedient to every rule. Whether you leave or stay, that is entirely up to you. But remember this, Europe's disciplined and obedient population has always been the breeding grounds for tyrannical regimes.
Whether it was Hitler's Germany or Joseph Stalin's USSR, the fact remains the same. They were built on the backs of people who thought that following the rules is morally right, no matter what the law actually says. Anyway, that's it for today's presentation. If you enjoy this type of content, comment down below, share it with a friend. It helps with the algorithm. I made a presentation about 3 months ago on where this problem stems for the Europeans. You can check it out over there, but I'll be seeing you next time. Until then, bye-bye.